Good evening. The hour of 6 p.m. having arrived, call to order this regular meeting of the Finance Organization and Personnel Committee. This meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel. The video is also posted on the city website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Copies of the printed agenda are available in the wall pockets just as you enter the meeting room. The public and other city councilors will be recognized to ask questions, make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks that will be made through the chair are not recognized an individual a second time until everyone who wishes has had a chance to speak. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room and identify themselves by name and address prior to speaking. Written comments from the public will be accepted at the city clerk's office until Tuesday at 1 p.m. And I'll call to order this regular meeting of Finance Organization and Personnel Committee. Declare a quorum present, no one calling in. And a reminder that the minute taker is logged in remotely. And time to time, we may have to remind us to make sure your microphone's on when you're speaking. Thank you. First item is solar generation facilities.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Cora Blomquist, Assistant City Manager, Public Works Director, Emergency Management Director. Well, good evening on this bright and actual kind of summer night. This evening, I'm coming forward with requests for the city manager to be authorized to enter into a letter of intent with Revision Energy for potential solar generation facilities located on several different city properties. In 2019, the city issued, you may remember, you may not, we issued a request for proposals seeking qualifications and development proposals for design, construction, and operation of solar generation facilities on city-owned property at the Dillent Hopkins Airport. The RFP had two phases. At that time, we identified phase one was the construction of approximately 1 megawatt solar generation facility that would provide power to our wastewater treatment plant. Our wastewater treatment plant is the largest electrical energy consumer in the county. Phase two was to construct an additional 1.2 plus megawatt solar generation facility that could potentially provide power to users on the airport grounds and also users off the airport facilities. The city received a number of proposals and evaluated them, and we made a recommendation to move forward with Revision Energy, and which we did. We did originally sign a letter of intent to cover both phases at that particular time. We began negotiating, and as we were negotiating, the regulatory environment that was still in flux in the state of New Hampshire. Basically, at that time, municipalities could not construct solar generation facilities over 1 megawatt. In particular, they could not could create facilities in another municipality and use that power across borders. So in this case, of course, our airport's located in Swansea. So that kind of threw a little bit of ointment into the eye for particularly the second phase. But we did move forward with the first phase. We did negotiate and execute a purchase power agreement for the treatment plant. We did construct and bring online the 1 megawatt facility for the wastewater treatment plant, and that has gone very well. Since that time, the execution of the first phase, there has been changes at the state level on the regulatory environment. Particularly, there is a bill that most likely will be signed by the governor that will allow the construction of facilities over 1 megawatt and also allow for the use of those powers outside of the boundaries of which the facility is constructed. So theoretically, if we were to construct a facility in Swansea, in this case on the airport, we could then utilize that energy within the city of Keene. So staff has been working with Revision to take a look at some potential other additional sites within the city, and we have identified 3. There's an area that they're interested in over on the Monadnock View Cemetery out towards the maintenance facility that's located on the site there. The former wastewater treatment facility located down in Rose Lane, you may be aware that was the treatment plant from the 1930s up until 1985 area. We do have a closed sludge monofill in that area, so that is a potential again for solar down in that area. And then they did identify two sites on the airport property. The airport directors has, of course, been heavily involved with this. And I will say Dave Hickley is also interested in the potential of providing electric charging infrastructure for vehicles and aircraft. He has been courting and talking with technology companies that are developing electric aircraft, and he feels that if we can have that potential infrastructure here, it could provide an interest for companies to come and either have facilities here at Keene or potentially have come in. So we've asked Revision whether that was something they could look at and potentially provide. They indicated they can. Currently, Revision has a contract with the state of New Hampshire, part of the Volkswagen money that came in. The state is implementing one their electric infrastructure plans. Revision was one of the several companies that bidded on, proposed on the construction of several electric vehicle infrastructure sites, and they have been awarded that. So they have experience in the electrification infrastructure. So we are interested again in discussions with them. What the next step is now, the development and signing of a letter of intent with Revision. This letter of intent basically gives them exclusive right to these areas while they go through some additional vetting of sites. Some of the issues that they have to look into, for example, is zoning, whether the zoning would permit the electrification plans. They need to look and talk with Eversource to take a look at the electrical infrastructure, distribution infrastructure, to see what kinds of potential improvements may be necessary if they were to provide it. So this would give them the comfort that they can move forward with those additional work, with, again, the intent that once they move through and they true up the potential sites, then the city would do a final agreement potentially with them for some type of either purchase power agreement, or potentially we could negotiate to own the facilities. So again, this evening, we are asking that you recommend you authorize the city manager to be able to negotiate and execute the letter of intent.
Thank you. Questions, members of the committee? Yes, ma'am.
I have a concern, like one of the areas mentioned is Monadnock View Cemetery. And I'm not familiar with that cemetery, but I'm thinking it's space that's available now, but what if that changes and you need more space for more people?
Of course, the Andy Bohannon Facilities Director, Cemeteries, Park Recreation is involved with this. This particular area is up towards Maple Avenue. If you're just trying to give you an idea, it's an area that is not currently designated for use as for cemetery purposes.
And do you foresee that changing at any point
At
soon?
this point, Mr. Bohannon does not believe that there will be any change or any need. If there becomes a need, it's a space that's really not easily accessible. I'm going to say it would require some additional work to make it accessible for the cemetery operations. He does not see a need for it for at least 20 years.
Thanks.
That question has been raised before about other activities for out there and our other cemeteries, but there's enough room out there for almost ever. And the whole complexion of how people are dealing with death is so different since that last analysis was made. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just to add to that as well, I believe actually a very similar matter was in front of us for Monadnock View Cemetery for a solar array a year or so ago, but I think maybe some complications came up.
Correct. That was the issue at that time. It was our folks here from Revision, and again, we ran into some issues. So that, again, they have worked through some of those, but now certainly there are more additional ones that they'll need to look at, but they think they can overcome. That's why they're interested in the letter of intent.
Members of the public? Yes, sir.
Peter Hansel, 61 Bradford Road in Keene. I'm a member of the Energy and Climate Committee of the city, and one of the subgroups of that committee is concerned with solar arrays in the community, particularly ones that can be used for community solar power. These three sites have been on our horizon for a year, well over a year now, and we've been urging the city to continue working towards getting arrays on them. I had the fortunate opportunity to go visit the airport site with the airport manager and with Revision Energy just about a week ago. It is such a beautiful site for solar array out there. Coincidentally, while we were there, we saw a battery-powered airplane take off while we were there. One of the first, I think, that any of us had ever seen, and it was pretty exciting to see that. But it also pointed out to the potential for the need of a charging station out of that site. Rose Lane is a beautiful site for solar. I've looked at that site. Our committee has looked at that. The Monadnock View Cemetery, if you picture where the community gardens are on that site, they're somewhat back near that area. There are potential off-takers for that right nearby. One of the things that we would like to see happen, it depends on how you go forward with the letter of intent, but if we can get some of the off-takers to be people that are lower middle income, that makes the site a lot more attractive for use in our city and would help us achieve some of the goals that we have set for ourselves in our energy plan. So I encourage you to keep this moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Remembered a question that I did want to actually ask on the charging stations. Do you happen to know which level of charger we would intend to be putting in, 1, 2, 3, and if there's an equivalent for the aircraft? I'm not as familiar with that.
Well, again, I'm not familiar with aircraft yet. I think the airport director has been doing a little more research on that. I'm going to say they're probably going to be in the 2, 3 range because, again, I think the intent is to provide the ability for, again, people visiting the airport, whether it's the restaurant, also to provide it for, again, if pilots who are coming in, taking off for an afternoon or evening flight, come back and go home. So I imagine it's probably going to be in that 2, 3 range. Again, we haven't finalized that. That's part of the next work that a revision would do to sort of say what is the appropriate level of chargers for this particular site.
Thank you.
Other city councilors? Members of the public? You ready?
I'm ready.
Go.
Move to recommend that the city manager be authorized to do all things necessary to negotiate and execute a letter of intent with Revision Energy for solar energy generation facilities on city-owned property at the Monadnock View Cemetery, Rose Lane, and DeLaunt Hopkins Airport, along with assessing the potential provision of electric vehicle and aircraft charging infrastructure at the DeLaunt Hopkins Airport. Andrew? Second.
Yeah, sorry.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion, members of the committee? Seeing none. All those in favor? No one's opposed. Unanimous.
Thank you.
Thanks, Court. Court, you're gonna go get on that motorcycle. Is it electric or gas? All right. Item number 2, Councilor Filio.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman of the committee, Randy Filio, Keene City Councilor. Obviously, you've seen the letter, just a couple of bullet points here. I wrote the letter basically just for one reason. That was from a request from a large group of constituents to ask me to do so. I do take the letter seriously. I know it's the type of thing that doesn't happen very often. I get that. So I do take it seriously that I wrote it on behalf of the constituents. It's just not a novel thing that I decided to write, and I know it's an uphill battle. But once again, when that large of a group of constituents ask me to write a letter on their behalf, I did so, and I agree with them. So basically, in my 24 years in the council, I've never seen any project, and we're talking about some of the proposed changes for downtown. In my 24 years, I've never seen such overwhelming opposition to any project, not even close. And those constituents of that large majority feel honestly that they're not being heard. You know, I realize that some say, well, it's really not an overwhelming majority, that it's closer to 50-50. And that's why they wanted me to write this letter, because they want to be heard at the ballot box. They're saying if the city council thinks that this is, you know, pretty much a 50-50 vote, and, you know, that's the way the public feels, they want a chance to go to the ballot box and show exactly how they feel. They feel, for the most part, that, you know, they're not being heard in the majority that they are. You know, obviously, it's ultimately up to the city council to make a final vote, and I know that. They're just asking that they get to be heard at the ballot box before we make a vote on that. And I know there's some comments, well, we've got to rush this, we've got to push this, we've got to get grants, you know, they're going to dry up. And that's simply not true, because I've called Senator Shaheen's office, spoke to a spokesman there. I have spoken to the New Hampshire Department of Transportation about grants. This idea about grants drying up, not being there, and not being there for a specific reason simply isn't true. Now, I would say to the full council, everybody make the call. I don't expect anybody to take my word for anything. Make your own calls. But from what I've heard staff telling us about we got to do this now, the grants aren't going to be there, based on what I just heard from the New Hampshire DOT and from Senator Shaheen's office, what we're hearing just simply is not accurate. You know, it's also the opinion of a large majority of our community and our constituents that overall the project has been handled poorly since day one. Quite honestly, I'm one that agrees with that. From day one, when we put a few easels up here, you know, back a couple of years ago and asked the public to get involved, you know, basically I think it was 100 or less actually showed up. And the drawings for downtown, which showed the green space and a couple other changes downtown, was virtually decided by about 30 people, 32 people. You know, I have all the graphs right here, but I'm not going to go through them all. And that's what wound up going to the ad hoc committee, which I sat on. And quite honestly, in looking back at the ad hoc committee, that was another problem. It was poorly attended. We never had a quorum. We barely had a quorum for many of the meetings. We never had full attendance. We had 2 members that never showed up for one hearing at all. Once again, never had a meeting that was fully attended. Poorly timed at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which I know councilors made a point and wrote a letter to us saying, you know, we got to pay better attention than when people can make it. So at that ad hoc committee where these decisions were being made to go to the city council, virtually there was no media, there was no public, and for the most part, there wasn't very many members. It wasn't until the last meeting of the committee where the media got a hold of it and put it out in the Sentinel on the radio that the public actually showed up. And I guess by all accounts, we had about 125 people, most of them showing their opposition, going, they didn't even know this project was going on. That's just the way it is. After the public left that day, cleared out, the mayor was the chairman, took a vote of the ad hoc committee, and they said, yeah, let's do it anyhow. We should never, ever have hearings like that at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when the public's at work. And now, you know, even at the 11th hour, when you would think we've got this down to a science, like we're ready to go, we're paying outside consultants to come flying in and literally write the recommendations on the back of a napkin and hand it to the radio station. You know, some of them, okay. I mean, some of them might work, might not. Others just totally bizarre. So if we're saying, you know, we've got to rush this along, but yet we got consultants coming at the last minute just throwing us recommendations, once again, the public's like, what the heck's going on? We want more of a say in this. Because now, like I said, you've had another consultant come in. Apparently, we're going to have a workshop with from what the mayor has said, the community's not going to be allowed to speak. And I don't even have any idea what proposals can be put in front of us. Does anybody here? Because I don't. And once again, the public's saying, you don't know, we don't know. We want a chance to voice our opinion at the ballot box. You know, we don't work for staff. We don't work for outside consultants. We work for our constituents. That's who we work for. And if they are asking just for a chance at the ballot box in November, we should give them that chance, and that's all this letter is asking. As far as the wording on it, I put down 2 sample questions. Be up to the council and talk to constituents how the wording would be. I have no problem with that. But ask the constituents how they feel and then move on. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Members of the committee, discussion? Other city councilors?
My back is sore today, so I'm going to sit. I guess my concern with this is that it sounds like a democratic proposal, but it really isn't in terms of democracy. I love the voters of Keene. The voters of Keene put me here. They've put you here. I don't think they're necessarily as representative a group as I would like to consult about this. Specifically, I'm concerned that it excludes everyone under 18. And I can't think of a group that's more important to get their input than young people, because young people are going to be the ones living with this decision that we make down there. And I'd like to hear what they have to say about it. So if we do end up having something on the ballot, I'd also like to see maybe some effort to go into the schools or to find out, what do other groups have to say about it? What do young people have to say about it in the high schools? What do the college students have to say about it? If we're really serious about going out and getting input, let's make sure that everybody's included. Thank you.
Members of the public?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Dory Maston. I live in Swansea, but as most of you know, I own a lot of real estate here in the city. My comments tonight are a little long, but I'll rush through it the best that I can. I want to express to all of you, and I have to read this, otherwise I'll lose everything. I want to express to all of you that the decision on whether or not to move forward with the infrastructure project should be placed on the ballot is one that requires serious consideration by all of you. It is, in my opinion, and many others, that this $14 million project should be placed on the ballot for our community to decide. I ask that you listen to the remaining part of my speech with an open mind and consider the following, and suggest if you have a pen, you write the following dates down. I filed a right to know request with the city pertaining to the infrastructure projects. The very first one was filed January 10th, and it was for any and all records in the city of Keene to the Keene Fire Department and to the Keene PD. These requests were made so that I could review them and share my findings with those who support Save the Square. These are relevant as there are many concerns throughout the community as to whether or not this project is safe. Will the emergency vehicles be able to maneuver without any delay? And what are their concerns? And are there more considerations that the community should make before making any decisions? I'm sorry, my pacemaker's going up and takes my breath away for a minute. Along with that request was the communications between Stantec and the city employees. I did receive that partial request. January 17th, I requested any and all communications that involve me personally or Save the Square, but also only involve the infrastructure project. February 9th, I requested all, thank you, I'm shaking too. February 9th, I requested all the traffic studies for the downtown project, along with any and all of its exhibits. How could we ever apply, expect, or receive a grant from the Transportation Department without a traffic study? Why would we apply if we can't provide this detailed information that is so relevant to this project? You can't provide it, or they cannot provide it to me. So I assume nobody in this room has seen one either. February 11th, an informal request was made for the mailing list of those who received the Stantec and the City of Keene postcard, as it still remains a complete puzzle as to how they decided who should get a postcard. March 1st, I requested copies of the grants that the city applied for pertaining to this project. This comes into play as our community should know every detail in this project and the nature, given its nature and size. If I read it correctly, Stantec has much to gain from pushing this project through. As a side note, I had reached out to Elizabeth Dragon on January 31st, only to be told that they do not have any final work product nor draft traffic study. I needed to make a request or look online to see when the traffic study would be posted. I made the request, and although she was going to speak with Kurt regarding the process and whether or not we had received one. That was January 31st. Now let me give you a few more dates. February 6th, I asked for the status of my right to know, as we would like it before that next meeting, so we could be better prepared. February 3rd, a request for an update for my right to know. March 10th, a request for an update on my right to know. April 4th, I received an email confirming that Kurt Bloomquist had reached out to Stantec for a copy of the draft traffic study. This was back in April and was what I believe to be Kurt's second or possibly third request to Stantec. How can we rely and trust a company like Stantec that financially benefits from the grant but refuses to provide our local officials with integral data that is the main part of this project? May 5th, another request made for the status of my right to know. May 12th, another one. Somewhere between May 12th and June 5th, I stopped by the clerk's office asking about my right to know, specifically the one including my name and Central Square, and Save the Square. I was told there must not be any. We haven't received any. June 5th, I write an email and ask for confirmation in writing that there aren't any emails and to please put it in writing. I received back that very same day that the office had not received any responsive records, but he would follow up. June 7th, the big day. City of Keens legal staff had found some emails. Yep, they finally found and discovered communications that I requested. There were 5,000 emails that were requested back in January. June 7th, they found 5,000 emails between KPD, Keene Fire Department, and city employees only pertaining to this project. 5,000. Now, the second request was regarding me, Save the Square. That was filed January 17th. They found 1,000 emails, not zero. We went from 0 to 1,000. Still not having received any of those emails that I requested an update on. June 13th, I asked for a status on my right to know. June 19th, I asked for another one. June 21st, after consulting with an attorney, I sent a demand letter, as this has become a ridiculous game of stalling and not allowing me to have access to critical information regarding this project. Less than a half an hour later, I receive an email stating that I will get the emails regarding KPD, Keene Fire Department, and city staff, hopefully by the end of the day today. And the remaining 1,000 emails, they don't know. Legal department's gonna go over them. They'll update me when they know. And as far as receiving any records today, they never came. And I sent an email this morning asking, and I didn't receive any response. In the original, or the last email coming from the city of Keene yesterday, there was no mention of that traffic study. When I would get it, nothing. This morning, I wrote the city and asked, when will those emails be ready for pickup today? And also, there was no mention of the traffic study and when that would come. I received no answer. In closing, I want to say that if our city, our mayor, and sadly our city attorney is holding back on releasing the traffic study and all of its exhibits, the internal emails that directly involve the safety of this community you serve and protect, how in the world can you make a decision to move forward? How can any of us feel safe with moving forward on a $14 million transportation grant without first having a thorough traffic study? I think it's now up to the community as a whole to decide how to move forward, as the information requested back in January is very much unfulfilled. If there isn't a traffic study available to me, that in turn means none of you have seen one either, because it doesn't exist. I haven't seen any of the communications. The city staff has yet to ensure that this project is safe and it's necessary. We haven't been given any of that information. I respectfully ask that you remove yourselves from this project for a few months. Allow the citizens to decide if they want to proceed and how it should move forward, as well as allowing the Attorney General's office to complete an investigation into this project and the tactics used to avoid a transparent and honest process. Thank you.
Anybody else from the general public? Mr. Hansel?
Again, Peter Hansel, 61 Bradford Road. Oops. Sorry. Peter Hansel, 61 Bradford Road. I didn't intend to get up and speak about this issue tonight. I was here mainly for the solar discussion earlier. But as a former city councilor myself, who sat in your chairs many moons ago, I couldn't help but just think about the meaning of representative government. You, as elected members of this community, are faced every day with very difficult decisions, budgets, zoning issues, contracts that you have to look at, capital improvement programs for the future. Many of them are very complex, and I think we elect you to look at those and determine whether or not you need more information to make the decisions you need to make. But in the end, the decision is yours. It is not the general public's. We elect you to do that job. And sometimes those decisions are difficult and challenging. This one certainly is. But I would just encourage you to fulfill the duty that you're elected to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pam Russell Slack. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Pam Russell Slack, 260 Beaver Street. First thing I want to make clear is I am not the spokesperson at Senator Shaheen's office that Councilor Filio spoke to. It was not me. I handed that off to another staff person in the Manchester office because, to be honest with you, I'm a little too close to this project, which I had no intention of being. But I personally, having sat as a previous city councilor, and my mother having been a previous mayor, the only woman mayor, I am extremely discouraged and disappointed at how this project has moved forward in general. I don't feel that the public has had all of the information that we need from the very beginning, and it is only because of Save the Square, to be honest with you, that things started to change, and a lot of the information was brought forward to the public. As a former city councilor, I always did my homework. And what I'm finding now, as a constituent of, two of you represent me on this project, and one is sitting in the back. And the problem here is I never heard one word from any of you to any of your constituents about this project. It's still disappointing to me. And we're here where we are today because Councilor Filio feels that this should go to the public for a vote. I'm not going to totally agree with former Councilor Hansel's position, but to be honest with you, when I was elected as a city councilor for Ward 2, by the way, which my family held that seat for 29 straight years, I gave up that seat because I now work for a congressional office. But the bottom line is that I always felt that I represented the constituents. I don't represent myself. I represented the constituents in my ward, Ward 2. That's who I represent. If you're at large, then you represent the entire city. You don't represent yourself. You represent them, us. And that's how you need to make your decision. Whether you move forward tonight on what Councilor Filio has proposed, that's your decision. You have to live with it. My major concern here is that this is going to the full council, and I will put this part in writing to the council, that when this goes to the council on Thursday in July, and I don't remember the date, I think it's the 6th, I want to make sure that whatever you propose and you chat about that night after the meeting, which I've never even heard of that procedure before in my entire life, is that you make sure that whatever decision you're voting on, that you make sure that your constituents, me, know what you're voting on, what you're voting for, and how that's going to impact the entire downtown. That's what I'm going to put in writing, and I'm really, really hoping, I'm actually timing how long you talk about this discussion to see if you actually have any questions, because what Councilor Filio put in his little memo here, it was only a suggestion. So I'd be open to hear exactly what your suggestions are. I thank you all for serving, and I thank you for the time.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Questions from us? All right.
For a motion?
No? I want to make sure we've covered the details. A item such as this on the ballot, is it allowed by the state law? And, you know, does it need to be specific or general in nature? Things of that nature need to be understood, I think, before we.
Sure. Yep. State law doesn't prohibit it. Seems that the general lay of the land with the law in New Hampshire is if your charter says you can have these sort of like survey questions on your ballot, you can do it. Other towns have done it. We have in Section 3 of our charter the ability to have referendum questions required or ordered by the City Council. I know Patty was looking into the history of whether we've done these before, and there's been very rarely, but there have been some questions, typically accompanying a charter amendment that we also put to ballot. But it is possible. And then as far as the form, I believe your second question was what kind of question? Ideally, certainly one question. If you put a referendum question about one topic, you have one question. There's always a risk of confusion if there's multiple, or contradictions if there's multiple. You know, how do you read those results together? And there's a process in state law as far as the logistics for it that applies to charter amendments. And it's not directly applicable to the referendum, but it's absolutely something we'd recommend you follow for a referendum. And that would look like having a question ordered by the full city council to the city clerk at least, and hopefully more than 60 days before the regular municipal election, which is November. And then preceding that point where you send it down, and stop me if you don't want to hear any of this, but the process I've thought through is before sending it to Patty to put on the ballot, it would be probably the best route from here to consider a recommendation up to the full council whether to craft a question or not craft a question. And then once that decision is made at city council, directing Patty to work with legal to workshop a question, put in a communication to then start the council process again so that a public hearing could be scheduled. That is a procedure also in the statute that we would recommend having on a referendum question. So, long story short, the process would restart after concluding this process to have a little bit more time to figure out what the question would be, have a public hearing, and then go through the process of giving it to Patty to put on the ballot.
My last question, just so we all understand, there had been some indication that it's not binding.
That's true. And I want to say probably, though, if the city council ordered it to be binding, it's in the charter to have it ordered by city council. So it would be recommended to be not binding because it's kind of a very loose situation with putting depends on the question, I suppose.
Thank you. I've never seen any kind of like educational materials at a ballot box, but with this complex of an issue, going back to Mr. Hansel's point of there's a lot that went into this and the education behind all the details and how it's pulled together and works together. Is there anything that'll, I mean, can we put packets in the ballot area, or is that something that's, I think there's restrictions on that.
I don't believe, I'm not sure. That would probably be entirely separate from what gets put into the ballot. That would probably be a government effort on education, I guess like an education campaign. Because I guess, and I'm speaking hypothetically, if you had a packet of information legally bound to the referendum, you would have to have some mechanism to require people to read it. So I'm not sure that that's a workable conception.
And that was my expectation for your response. It's just, that's the hard part for me, and going into my opinion of this a little bit is there is so much information that's come behind this to, I think about, how many times somebody walks into a ballot box without not understanding all of the questions on there, or not knowing all the candidates, or not knowing that. It's not everyone who is an engaged voter that votes, and I get nervous about putting a question like this out without that information being available. So, we've spent a year working on this, right? And it's hard to condense that down into a question. So.
I definitely can understand Ms. Madston's frustration in not getting all the information needed. And I am concerned about the fact that the July 6th meeting isn't open to the public to be able to participate. I think that this is sort of a tricky situation because feelings are running high, and most of the people I've heard from are not in favor of the changes. But I also feel like we are elected, and we're elected to make these difficult decisions. I'd want to hear, like, if I understood you correctly, you're saying that it would be too confusing to have two questions. There should just be one question.
Ultimately up to city council, but that would be absolutely our recommendation. There's a lot of information about how voters read things, so I would keep that in mind.
And had you or other staff members had an opportunity to discuss and consider language that would be for us to consider to put on the ballot?
I'm not aware of that, but that was probably we were thinking the same, that would be a focused conversation. So that was why I had recommended probably that longer process to make it a very deliberate working group to workshop the language.
And when you say a working group, would that include council members?
No, I mean Patty and legal. Once we get the temperature of what you're looking for, and then provide something workshop for you to then workshop further.
Okay, thanks.
Move to accept as informational.
I'll second it. Yeah, I'm aligned with the idea of accepting this informational. I think we are elected to represent. I like the idea of getting as much public input as we can possibly get, but I think we've probably heard from more people at this point than go to a ballot box on some of these years. So, while I appreciate the idea, I think it's just it's a delay, and it's pushing something further out. It's non-binding even at that point, so I don't see the value.
Well, as a chair, I don't want to manipulate the discussion or the time, but I think it's going to be difficult for us to pose a question when we don't really know what the project is. You know, maybe by going to informational, we can talk about it in 3 weeks after the council deals with something and we know what we're talking about. But right now, if we were trying to pose a question, we don't know what it's going to be. And if it's non-binding, that's a lot of activity for not having as much input as one would think. I think it's true that we've heard from a lot of people, and I've heard from many, many people, and I've understood their point and using their information when I make decisions. And I don't think that posing a question, are you in favor of the project, is the right way to approach this when we don't even know what the project's going to be. And if it were to work its way to being a binding, and remember, 3/4 of this is a water and sewer project, and it fails, we've gone down the wrong highway. So I'd like to see us have a better approach if we're going to go to binding. And I think we'll know better, is it next Tuesday or next Thursday, what happens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to echo some of the sentiments around the difficulty of a question that we'd be able to pose succinctly on a ballot. The suggestions, at least in front of us here, don't leave a lot of room for nuance. So if a voter is in favor of 4 out of 5 parts of the MSFI proposal, they want no changes to Central Square, they want to keep Gilbo 2A, but they want bike lanes. How, in that situation, how would they express that to the council? Would they have to vote against the MSFI? Would they have to vote in favor of it? I'd be worried that we'd be not getting the full information from our voters. So I am concerned about getting an accurate question. There is a second part to this as well, which is the halting of future discussions, which I think would be wholly inappropriate of us as a council to do. It's our jobs to continue to get information. We heard from counselors at the last committee meeting or council meeting that they didn't have enough information to be able to make a vote that night. And the public as well has voiced their opinion that they don't have all of the information that they'd like. So I think we need to continue to have these workshops, continue to have opportunities as a council to ask questions, to get information, and to have a discussion about how this project should best go forward. So I certainly can't agree to halting discussions, and therefore I'm in favor of accepting this as informational.
Second time.
Yeah, to your point, as far as more information is needed, I would agree with that. I am concerned about this July 6th meeting and the public not being able to participate, and I don't know who makes that call, and unfortunately, I missed the last meeting. So, you know, I'm concerned, like, if July 6th ends up being the last workshop and the public feels they haven't had the opportunity to also participate, that's what I would like to see, is where both the council and the public could continue to participate, and if we have to hold more workshops, we hold more workshops. And we don't make a decision until everybody's comfortable with the decision. It may not be the decision they want, but I'm just saying until we get to that point. So I don't know if the assistant city manager can answer or respond to the July 6th meeting, or if that can be, what's the word, tweaked so that the public can participate. I don't know who made that call.
I don't know that that is finalized. I have not had that conversation with the mayor. The city manager probably has. So it's quite possible that there is not going to be, it won't be open to public input because the public input opportunities have already been there. But it's not certainly a call that we will make as staff. So I can get back to you and the full council on whether or not we have an answer on that.
I don't know if you know if the call has been made by the mayor on that.
No, my understanding is the workshop was based on what the city council asked for, and this is really your show, so it's up to the city council as a body.
That's true. It was the council asked for a workshop for themselves. And I don't, it wasn't a unanimous vote, I can tell you that. For the specific purpose of getting a final product so it can come forward, so. You know, at this point, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with the sentiments of my fellow counselors. The request is a little too vague. I'm not very much in favor of halting discussion until November. The two questions are quite broad, and also we're a representative democracy, and that's how representative democracy works. And I'll be blunt, I'm a little concerned that, you know, it going to the ballot wasn't an issue a week ago, and now all of a sudden it is a major issue. And that, to me, just doesn't really make sense. So that's why I feel the way I feel.
All right, it's on our table. We have a motion and a second, so ready to vote? All in favor? No one opposed, unanimous. I'm sure we'll talk again. The next item is we have a communication from Councilors Williams and Chadbourne. Bobby?
Hi, Bobby Williams, City Councilor, Ward 2. With me today is Representative Jody Newell, who has been very involved in this process. What we're essentially asking for is a public discussion of the opioid settlement and what it means for us in terms of, you know, there's a whole bunch of money that's available in a pot at the state. There's a smaller amount of money, $113,000, that is available, that's ours, that is, belongs to the city as a result of our participation in the opioid settlement lawsuit. But we had concerns that, you know, the discussion of how that money was spent was kind of on autopilot, and we didn't have the broad discussion of what are our needs and what are the different organizations that can work on this, and how are they going to work together, and how can we maximize our opportunity to gain access to these funds and to use them to save lives here in Keene. So what we're asking for is a public discussion. Before you, there was some recommended language for the motion that's before you. We read that, and we just wanted to make it a little more stronger and a little more clear. So you'll see the motion that we've suggested. You know, there's a couple elements in there. We tried to keep the same framework of the language, but we wanted to be a little more clear that we see the city as a partner in this. We don't want to hand this off to a third party to manage the discussion entirely. We want to be part of a discussion which may be led by some of our social service agencies, but you know, there may be potential need for funding, for example, that the city would come forward with, and that request would be made at the appropriate time. And the other thing, we clarified the language in this request, was to include the word community discussion in there. We want to make sure that this is not, you know, just a discussion among social service agencies, and that we're actually hearing from people who have been affected by this, and that we hear their voices and listen to them and understand what the need is. So, if I could have Jody, would you like to add anything?
Sure. I just wanted to, well, first of all, thank Councilors Chadbourne and Williams for bringing this, submitting this letter and really taking seriously something that I take very personally and very seriously. And I think, the main things that I hope to gain from this are, there are two things that implementing something like this, having these community discussions gains for us, right, as a city, because I do think that we all have a stake and an interest in doing the most that we can with this opportunity. So I think, number one, what it does is it brings a variety of different perspectives to the table so that we can understand. I think it's understand exactly where the gaps and the barriers are, and what I mean by that, just by example, I'm a social worker. I work in a transitional housing shelter, okay? So from that perspective, as a social worker, I see things from one perspective, but I also see things from a different perspective because I actually lived in my car with my kids at one point. You see things differently. You bring all different perspectives in navigating a system so that we can truly understand how we can do the most good. And I think all of us here and all of us, in social services and things like that, we all have very good intentions and we want to do the most good with this opportunity, and that this is a way for us to really make sure that we are thorough, that we are intentional, and that we make sure that we do the most good with what we have. And also, not to harp on it or anything like that, but I lost my fiance to opiate overdose. And so when we have these conversations, the disability community has a saying, nothing about us without us. That's what I'm saying, is that this money is an unfortunate consequence of what people like myself, like people, my fiance who I lost, people like my two boys who are growing up without a dad right now. This is an unfortunate consequence of what we have all been through, that trauma, and a lot of that has to do with the stigma. So you'll see me get very emotional. That's what trauma is, guys. The thing is that I think that as a city, it can do nothing but good to value the perspectives of the people on whose behalf this money comes in. All right, so I guess that's really all I want to say, and just thank you to everybody who's considering this. I really hope that we can make this happen. I don't think it's a huge ask, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Members of the committee?
Does the co-author of the letter have anything she would like to add?
I think it's a pretty important conversation, and I appreciate that Representative Jody Newell approached me about it, and it's important to have not only the professionals at the table and those of us who represent the community, but also the voices of the people that have been directly affected or are even still involved in a way that this affects them currently. And I think this is a great idea to have a community conversation with different stakeholders at the table, as well as the voices of those affected. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just got a couple questions about the differences between the two proposals. In the changed one, Councilor Williams provided us, we see a change from nonprofit substance abuse providers to nonprofit community organizations. And I'm just wondering what your impression of that is, and if you had any organizations in mind.
Sure. I think saying nonprofit, I'm sorry, what did it say in the first place? I think the difference between putting it in these different ways is that there are different organizations that don't necessarily, if we pigeonhole it into a specific framework, then we're limiting the input that we get. And I think that really all that does is broaden it out to a variety of organizations that are working in different capacities and maybe on different levels, in different ways. So I think it just brings more people into the conversation, which can only be good.
But ultimately, it would be up to the city manager to identify perhaps a lead partner with this, and that would be in a position to, we want to leave the opportunity open for maybe not just one partner, but, as many as will join us.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important for us to provide some background information. What is the opioid lawsuit? Where is the money? Where did it come from? What is the trust fund? How is it going to be managed going forward? Because that might answer some of the questions that have been asked, as well as some of the questions you have. I just want to start with thanking Representative Newell. I appreciate your personal experience, and I appreciate your willingness to share it. That's very important, so thank you for that. And I appreciate the counselors who brought this forward, because it is a very important topic, and we understand that as staff. So I did my best to organize in a concise manner for this, in the sake of time. What is the money? Where is it coming from? And how did we get to this point? So the city manager would like to be here. She's at the New Hampshire Managers Conference tonight, so that's why she can't be here. She is, by the way, on the Trust Fund Advisory Commission, so she can obviously provide a lot of insight on this topic. But let me just start by sharing with you how I thought this through in the organization here. So, though a broad conversation for the region about the community's response to the opioid crisis is needed, as has been mentioned, and the city's participation certainly is important, the use of the city's specific distribution, the city's specific distribution of funds is really a matter that is subject to the FOP committee and the city council's review of the budget process. So the opioid abatement trust funds received by the city specifically were the result of the city filing suit. That filing was based on the expenses incurred by the city. So police, fire, human services, our costs were compiled and submitted as part of that filing process. So the city is one of 23 counties, cities, and towns who filed suit in New Hampshire. And those 23 entities are now receiving 15% of the settlement funds. Those are settlement funds received to date and settlement funds that will result from the continued litigation process. The city's use of funds that have been received and will be received will be tied directly to the types of expenses that we submitted as part of the lawsuit. But that doesn't mean there aren't opportunities for other organizations in the community. This includes the use of the funds for the addition of a social worker position who will follow up on drug-related police interactions to connect individuals with needed services. We have received our portion of the 15% thus far, and as the lawsuits continue and additional funds are paid, we will continue to receive our portion of the 15%. We estimate this will be about $40,000 to $50,000 per year, maybe, for the next 16 to 17 years, maybe, but time will tell. The funds could continue to support the social worker position, and I believe the city manager is planning to bring that to the council in the future as the opportunity arises. This helps to keep some of the expenses associated with that position off of the city's portion of the tax rate. Now, what about the remaining 85%? I did a lot of reading into this and looking at the RSAs and looking at the trust fund. So the remaining 85% of the funds will be distributed by the state based on a grant application process. And that's a much larger sum of money than what the city is receiving, of course. The grant process at the state level is moving slowly. It could take 6 months or more to receive any of that funding. The opioid trust fund grant process allows opportunities for government agencies and nonprofits to submit applications for what they are calling qualified opioid abatement projects. And they define that as, in House Bill 1639, which establishes the Opioid Abatement Trust Fund and Advisory Commission. It states the commission shall use the fund to support programs associated with the prevention, treatment, and recovery of substance use disorders. So that does open the door for Keene organizations to apply for and receive grant funds from the opioids, the state's opioid trust fund. That there are additional funds that are available. We would certainly participate in a conversation about identifying gaps in services and needs of the community, and we envision a local nonprofit leading that conversation, a nonprofit that's involved in prevention, treatment, and recovery of substance use disorders, to be specific. This would not be in regards to use of the funding received by the city as part of the lawsuits, which is what the city staff brings to the council through this FOP committee. The community conversation could be helpful to local providers who can apply for the state's funds moving forward. We certainly see that. The county, by the way, is also receiving funds. I think they're receiving about double what the city is receiving, and we expect that they would participate in that conversation as well. The city manager has contacted Cheshire Medical Center, who's referred us to the Doorway, which is an organization that, the Doorway, I want to get this right, is an extension of Cheshire Med, and it connects people to the supports and services, peer recovery support services, prevention, including naloxone screening and evaluation, supports and services to assist in long-term recovery treatment, including medication-assisted treatment, or MAT. Yeah. They've referred us to the Doorway, who may be interested in holding that community meeting. And we can certainly get back to you on that. I don't have an answer on that yet. But there may be others well-positioned to lead that conversation as well. So the city is interested in participating. I think we are an important part of that conversation. We do feel that organizations that are involved in drug misuse and recovery would be better positioned to lead that conversation, and the funds received by the city certainly are subject to the council's discretion based on recommendations coming from the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I see a couple opportunities to kind of consolidate the requested pieces in, but while keeping the heart of the original motion, which I'm very supportive of being a community discussion and bringing in members of the public, bringing in affected individuals. I think that would be a great part of the conversation. I really like the idea of having a community member, community organization lead it, and the city be a participant and not the leader in this. Because to your point, we're looking to receive, $100,000 what we have, and there'll be some amount over years, but the state is going to be giving away through grants $200+ million. So I think that's the bigger opportunity, is to help bring our expertise to that grant writing process, to, the city manager's experience with what that group is looking for could be helpful for that discussion, whether it's her that participates or another members of staff or counselors, however it is. So I have a couple thoughts on tuning up the original motion to include, I'm curious for the attorney's opinion, changing to lead a community discussion, which the city participates in along with other partners and the community around the gaps in service to encourage, just inserting that in the, around the word discussion.
Which motion are you referring to?
Yeah. I'm getting confused.
The original motion, so that we would still be focused on supporting and encouraging grant applications, and that they would still be led, that the city manager requests a nonprofit substance abuse provider lead a community discussion, which the city participates in with other partners and the community around gaps in service to encourage grant applications to the state's opioid abatement trust fund. So to force the inclusion and the intent of including other partners, not just one nonprofit, to the inclusion of the community as a whole, and to say that the city would be participating in that.
But I think we need to be able to reach out to as many folks as possible to be part of this. And I'm thinking that the professionals are probably better suited at finding the right mix of folks to be a big part of the discussion, facilitating the discussion. And hopefully those who have shown the interest and want to benefit from it will then participate and have discussions. I think the information that's out there is only going to come from those who have the needs in the best form for others to understand it. So if we can get the hospital or one of the other agencies to facilitate this and provide the places and get everybody involved, it'd be really beneficial, and then we can lend support in different fashions and certainly point to each agency that has a certain part of it that they want to specialize in, where those funding solutions are. It'd be very important. I think having it outside this building will give us more participation, and hearing from the professionals that work with the issues that they're facing every day is very, very important. So we got a lot of potential in craft to right. And remember, we're starting a project here. This is not concrete. Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to throw in one thing. As a social worker, I know that there are some clients who it's going to take me months or however long, or they're never going to be open with me at all because I am in a particular position. I know that. I understand. Half-truths, you're going to get manipulated, things like that. And I understand it because it's based on experience that has nothing to do with me. It has experience that has to do with dealing with other people in an institution or dealing with the red tape of an institution that has nothing to do with any individual person. The intent of having all of these different parties be involved in it is to allow for people to be able to contribute what they have to say without having any of those inherent barriers in the way. So, no shade to anybody. I'm just saying that it's a product of what people go through in life. So I think that it is important that the city takes a strong role in it.
Yeah, I think what's important to me is that the city views itself as a partner in this process, and that city councilors in particular, attend this discussion and think about it and think about how it's going to affect our decision making down the line when we do decide how we're going to spend the money that Keene has, and we do decide what we're going to do as far as outreach. And I do think there is a great opportunity here to discuss with other agencies, including the county, for example, just who's doing what, and kind of map out, these are the different areas, and let's make sure we have everything covered. And of course, part of that is talking to the people on the ground who probably have perhaps the best view of what's going on. So that's my thought with the language is just that it's done in a spirit of partnership with whichever nonprofit or other group is identified.
Any concerns with what my recommendation was?
Could you say it again?
All right. I'll just try it, and then we can tune it up if I need to. So how does that work? Move to recommend the communication be accepted as informational, and that the city manager request a nonprofit substance abuse provider lead a community discussion, which the city participates in with other partners and the community. A little awkward, but around gaps in service to encourage grant applications to the state's opioid abatement trust fund.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am going to vote in favor of this. That being said, I do agree with Representative Newell and Councilor Williams that we do need to have a lot of community organizations taking a leadership role in this process. Those of you who know me know I drive a lot. Just Tuesday, I put 600 miles on my work truck. So I get a lot of time to listen to podcasts, and more recently I listened to a podcast called The 13th Step, which is by NHPR, which details the ordeals those seeking recovery go through in trying to get their life back. And I won't give any spoiler alerts, but it's, it was pretty shocking, and it was pretty eye-opening what people have to go through when they're in recovery, or even just trying to get in recovery. And it's also very shocking what people will do to silence reporting on that. It became more clear that substance use disorder isn't just this, single issue that affects someone. It's often compounded by a number of different issues that that person is facing, especially mental health issues, which I really appreciated that Councilor Williams and Representative Newell put in there, as we really need mental health providers to, and mental health nonprofits to be a part of this discussion. I mean, those of you who know me know that, I have had my own struggles with mental health issues. My family has had a long history of mental health and substance abuse. Those of you who know me best know that my biological father, who was a firefighter, committed suicide when I was a young child. So I certainly commiserate with Representative Newell on the trauma, and that just adds to the questions of why I have abandonment issues, but that's neither here nor there. I am, not to digress, I am going to support this, but I would like the city manager to consider having a group of community nonprofits lead this conversation, with the city taking a strong role, because this doesn't exist in a vacuum. Substance abuse doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's compounded by other issues. It's exacerbated by other issues. And those seeking treatment or those in the depths of substance use disorder are compounded by so many issues, such as poverty, such as housing, such as food insecurity, such as mental health. And I could take up the next hour listing the issues those facing substance abuse endure, but we need to make sure that the experts who have experience in those fields have a seat at the table and are actively participating in this conversation. And I think it may be worthwhile for the city manager to even consider, or for the mayor, for that matter, to consider an ad hoc group formed to help oversee this. But that would be for the mayor to decide. So, thank you.
Just to quickly respond, I think the motion as stated should be fine. We did confer for 5 seconds. However, I think it's always been the assumption of city staff that we would participate. So to just capture that in the motion is certainly fine. And I think the city manager's already taking a leadership role in trying to convene the group, or find somebody to convene the group. So I think we're moving in the right direction here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
She turned the microphone light off, so I think we're good.
Adjourned? Yeah.
Well, we are adjourned.
All right, that's the word.